Good afternoon. Terrific conversations and discussions held up to this point, so I want to take us to a different level. And let's set up a premise here. It's very easy for us, and rightfully so, given some of the grand imagery that we have from Iwo Jima, to possibly walk away with a misconception that this battle was a given, the victory was a given based on the superior industrial might or firepower or combined arms of the U.S. forces. Well, I'm going to take us on a journey that suggests otherwise. And I'm going to begin us with the amphibious operation and take us to northern Iwo Jima, where that grand opening to the battle devolved to something more like this: the four-man fire team. That's 3 Marines and a leader, led by a corporal. And in northern Iwo Jima, we'll find out just how priceless this was for victory. So let's begin with the amphibious assault. Now, we've all seen a lot of color footage over the years. They did a terrific job of capturing, especially the amphibious landing in color footage. However, it's always been scrambled. I have unscrambled a lot of that footage, or some of it, and would like to take us to the beach and all the way to the airfield on D-Day before we go up to the northern Iwo Jima. Let's talk about the plan once again. The landing beach selected on the south side of Iwo Jima, roughly 2 miles long from Suribachi all the way to the rock quarry in the northern end. Well, the Japanese certainly knew that as well. But the planning force decided to land the 5th Marine Division on Green Beach, Red Beaches 1 and 2, and the 4th Marine Division on Yellow Beaches 1 and 2 and Blue Beach 1. So 6 landing beaches, 500 yards wide, with a battalion landing team assigned to land on each of them. On the far right, there was 1.5 battalion landing teams. We'll talk about that in just a few moments. The scheme of maneuver, or the objective for the first day, was related to the planners selecting an objective, the 01 line, which was practically cutting the port chop in half, if you will, with a narrow southern end to be cut off that day. And the scheme of maneuver for the 5th Marine Division, as has been discussed, was to essentially cut the head off the beast and to charge across and head to the north, and for the 4th Marine Division to take the number 1 airfield and press on the portion of the 2nd airfield as well, with their 2 regiments landing in the assault. Now let's go to the color footage. We're going to use footage from 2 photographers, one of whom was a Coast Guardsman named Charles Bossert, who sailed to Iwo Jima on the LST-761. That's one of 4 LSTs assigned to the 2nd Battalion, 23rd Marines, one of the 3 infantry regiments for the 4th Marine Division. Therefore, we'll track them as they go ashore. And let's introduce ourselves to a few of those leaders from the 2nd Battalion. 2nd Battalion 23rd was led by Major Bob Davidson, who took over in the Mariana Islands. And he's his executive officer is Major Jack Padley, who had previously commanded Fox Company through the previous 3 operations. Major Lester Faught commanded Easy Company of the 2nd Battalion, and G Company was commanded by Captain Carl O.J. Gus Grusendorf. And Fox Company, which would also land in the assault, was commanded by then Captain Lawrence F. Snowden, later Lieutenant General Lawrence F. Snowden. And those 2 companies would land in the assault. I've used a pie chart of Yellow Beach 2 just for a couple of illustrations for us. One, that it's 500 yards wide, with Easy Company landing on the left, Fox Company landing on the right. And whereas, let's say, the beach on Saipan was perhaps 5 yards deep from the water's edge, the Marshall Islands, their first operation, probably something similar. But really, in effect, the beach here at Iwo Jima was some 735 yards deep, all the way to the airfield. And that airfield is 200 feet in elevation. That's a 9% average grade uphill, without regard to the terrain involved from A to B. We'll talk about that as we go. Let's jump into the footage. Here we see the first Amtraks coming off LST-761. The sun's been over the horizon for about 18 minutes, and we can see them moving into the water. Sometimes I'll give us a couple of views in slow motion. Now this is the chance. You can't smoke inside the LST in the Amtrak, so it's a chance for the Marines to catch one more cigarette before heading into beach. And that's exactly what they do. These are Marines of Easy Company, 2nd Battalion, 23rd. Bossard is sitting up on the driver's cab, looking aft, shooting footage. About 3 miles ahead, toward the beach, there's a line of 12 LCS gunships. Those LCIs that were mentioned earlier that were suffered terribly 2 days earlier while supporting the Frogmen. There were supposed to be 24, and now there's just 12 supporting this landing. And here we are with the Easy Company Marines moving up to the line of departure, which is 5,000 yards from the beach itself. Looking inside the landing craft, I think I see Steve McCloud looking at us right there. But a beautiful view here of the Marines, unprecedented. But if I put this in slow motion, can you see the stencils on the back of the Marine in front of us and on the helmet cover to the left? 322 tells us very distinctively this is Easy Company. That's their unit identification symbol. And in fact, I can see a name on the helmet cover to the left. Might be difficult to see there, Knisley. Well, son of a gun, that's Corporal Dick Knisley of Easy Company, photographed here on Maui a couple of months earlier with his right arm around one of their corpsmen, John Zimmy Zimmerman. This is from Zimmerman's negatives. And I gotta say, it's kind of a special day here. That's Dick Knisley. Well, we have with us here today 2 of his sons, Dick Jr. and Dave Knisley. Would you stand and say hello for us, please? I'll let the footage continue to run. There's Nagy back there looking at us. Some of the other names I'm still working on, they're hard to read. But it's an extraordinary view. Now it's nice to know who they are, right? Who we're watching. Now we're making the run in on the beach. And to our left is A Company of the 1st Battalion, 23rd Marines. They're headed for Yellow Beach 1 with a guide boat in front of them. Now, up close to the beach, that line of 12 gunships, the LCSs, are making their second run on the beach. We see the tall smokestack of a knocked-out Japanese lugger there along the beach. That marks the boundary between Yellow Beach 2 on the right and Yellow 1 on the left. And those gunships are launching their second barrage of rockets, 4.5-inch rockets, 140 of them each. And now, having done that, those 12 ships keep their bows toward the beach and back off and stay in position, awaiting the approach of the LVTs, the first wave. And here they come. And the first wave of LVTs are armored Amtraks, LVT A4s, as we'll see in just a moment, passing by the USS Tennessee, the surviving battleship from Pearl Harbor. Now we're in the boat once again with Dick Knisley, looking across the fellows from 1st Battalion as the Tennessee unleashes some fire on Mount Suribachi. Again, looking forward to the 1st Battalion on our left. Looking ahead, we can see the armored Amtraks in front of us, and the LCSs, the gunships, up there ahead as well as we approach. Now that first wave, the armored Amtraks, are passing through the line of gunships. These are LVT A4s. The ones right in front of us are A Company, 2nd Battalion, 2nd Armored Amphibian Battalion. There's 102 of these leading the assault waves, each carrying a 75-millimeter howitzer, if you will, and an open turret, as you see there. Once they pass through this line of gunships, they're unmasked, and they begin firing their weapons immediately. That's 102 75 millimeters headed for the shore. That's pretty good extended firepower. And they could fire it. Here come the troop carrying Amtraks now reaching the gunships, and here they are. This is the first troop wave, which in the scheme of things is the second wave headed for Iwo Jima. There's 13 rifle companies, the assault element of 13 rifle companies headed for the beach in this wave. That's 26 platoons, something over 1,600 Marines, 91 Amtraks headed for the beach in the first wave. This shot shows that first wave, the armored Amtraks, now reaching the beach and clawing their way up, firing away at any targets they can see. We can see the boundary, the lugger there. With Dick Knisley, we find out that we're landing on the wrong side. that Japanese lugger. He actually came ashore, some of you did, on the wrong beach, Yellow Beach 1, with the 1st Battalion, which explains a lot from some of the stories for us. In fact, one of my friends at Cormen with 2nd Battalion spent 2 days treating Marines he'd never seen before. He was with the wrong battalion. First wave has now touched ashore at Iwo Jima, and that's Yellow Beach 2 there on the left side, or the left end of Yellow 2. Now, I want to switch you to Fox Company on the right side. As we'll see momentarily, the embankment inclined from your angle, or from your vantage, it reached up to maybe as high as 16 feet, is what they said. When we see some of this footage, we start to believe what they tell us. The center of each rifle company's assault echelon, there was a middle Amtrak. There were 7 each, and the one in the middle carried the company executive officer. Hope that made sense. First Lieutenant Charlie Ahern was Fox Company's executive officer. While we're at it, we also have another guest here with us, his nephew Tom Ahern. Tom, where are you out here? There he is. Tom, thanks for being here. Right, Charlie got ashore and immediately sent a message back. We are ashore, and currently there's only light, small arms fire. But right above their heads, right above Charlie, was a blockhouse. And he was dismayed after all those rounds fired directly on the beach that this thing looked absolutely untouched. And it had 2 levels. It had a larger caliber anti-boat gun in the lower level and a 25 millimeter on an upper level. And it was interlocking fire with another blockhouse 200 yards to the south, or to Charlie's left. Well, to Charlie's left, the 2nd platoon leader, platoon sergeant was Leo Kelly. And as a hard charger, he was determined to get Fox Company into the attack, and started to crawl over the embankment, and was hit by that 25 millimeter immediately. And that bogged things down. It held up the company immediately, as you might imagine. Well, there was not much they could do about it because the flamethrowers were in the 2nd wave. So here comes the 2nd troop wave, as close as 3 minutes behind them. And that includes the company commander, and other heavier weapons being carried in an LVT-4 that has a ramp in the back that can come down, including the flamethrower guys. This footage shows the 2nd wave hitting the beach. This is Fox Company, 2nd Battalion, 23rd, landing on Yellow Beach 2. I'll give us a couple of looks at this. What we can see here, as we pay attention, is Marines coming out of the Amtraks and fanning out to the right. I'm going to zoom in so we can see some of this. If we circle, we can see the profile of that blockhouse still covered in sand in the center. We can see the position that 1st Lieutenant Ahern was in, and maybe by now the company commander, Captain Lawrence F. Snowden. And if we look to the right, we can see those Marines fanning out to the right. One of those was PFC Don Swindle, a veteran of the Marianas operations and the Marshals. And he had a brand new replacement Marine with him, a 27-year-old, and they were operating the bazooka. That was their job. Well, they got out to the top of the embankment off to the right and found another fellow with a bullet hole in his helmet that had come from the right. And Don said, well, the company was held up by something on the left, but we knew we had to move, and they did. And much of 3rd Platoon got to it, and they started pressing the attack, and they got as far as 500 yards up the beach before the enemy fire really picked up in intensity and left the company behind them. Once those flamethrowers came ashore, and they had satchel charges as well, they were able to eliminate the resistance from those blockhouses, and the company could attack. And this is Yellow Beach 2 as the attack presses inland. A short time later, you can see the lugger in the distance. Now let's move to this footage, which you've seen before. This is Charlie Bossert's footage with Easy Company, 2nd Battalion, 23rd Marines. Now, I always hedge a little bit, and you say, how do you know it's not 1st Battalion? Well, for one reason, they're looking our direction, 4 direction, and we can also now see the 2 yellow stripes on that LVT-4 coming in. These guys are all wearing the assault packs, the top pack only, and getting ready for their attack overland. We can see some concertina wire, barbed wire up at top of the terrace there that is rarely seen or noticed. But I'm going to give us a couple of views of this closely, because what we're looking at now is the effect of the so-called sands of Iwo Jima, which is not sand at all. In fact, it's just cinders or volcanic grit, as much as 60% glass. So they described it as it's like running in coffee grounds, like trying to run in a bin of wheat or run in snow. Now, these young Marines were very fit, but they've been on a ship for over a month with very little room for physical exercise, very little water, really. So they're probably dehydrated, as far as we would know today, have lost a good bit of their fitness, and then there's the high stress of combat as well that takes hold. So every 5 yards, you might say, even though there's light, small arms fire to begin with, takes a great deal of energy. A short time later, as enemy fire then began to pick up, that attack began to look more like this as you get closer to midday. This is a short time later. Correspondent Bob Cook came ashore with Headquarters Company, 2nd Battalion, and snapped this photograph looking back toward the beach. You can see we've covered about 40 to 50 yards. A short time earlier, Captain Snowden, the commander of Fox Company, had reached this point and found they were going no further. The company was pinned down by heavy machine gun fire. And his compadre on the left, Major Lester Faught, reported the same thing. And they requested that tanks be landed immediately. That sent a message out to Major Bob Neiman, who commanded C Company, 4th Tank Battalion. And he came ashore. He sent his company ashore in 2 LSMs, his coming right in behind Fox Company. And as he drove his tank off the bow, it immediately bogged down on the beach. And they fought for an hour trying to extract it. Finally had to abandon it, and then had to take casualties who had come aboard out to the hospital LST and leave that tank there. If you look to the far right of that photograph, you'll see Neiman's tank abandoned there. This photograph was taken about 10 minutes after 10 in the morning of D-Day. The closer we get to midday, this is what it looked like. And the Marines had to get down and stay down. It comes to mind, so I'll tell the story. Fox Company's gunnery sergeant, Harold Douglas, he said he came under fire by a machine gun, and he said, I had to lay there for 2 hours probably before I could move. At one point, as he was trying to move forward, and I'll say it this way, when that fire started, this attack devolved into an individual odyssey of each Marine trying to find his way off that beach and up toward the airfield. Unit attack was not really an option at this point. So Marines found their own way up. Addison Johnson ran up to a shell hole and saw there were 4 Marines in there. Too many, he kept going. If 5 Marines in there, 4 or 5, that presents a target. Too many, kept going. John Ruggiero, he found himself pretty close to the airfield in a shell hole, and he would pop up in one position, never pop up in a second position. He would move 10 yards to the right and pop up for another look. Sam Haddad, the platoon guy, the platoon sergeant with 3rd Platoon, he said that as he was running forward, he would try to choose the smaller hole. Maybe it wasn't a fixed target, maybe it was just a one-off, and he would yell out, go for the smaller hole. Whether he was right, he didn't know, but that was his plan. It was an individual odyssey. And Gunny Douglas said that at one point he ended up with a shell hole with the company commander, Larry Snowden. And he said, I don't know how long we were there. We didn't move. We didn't say anything. We just looked at each other while this pummeling took place around us. And they were making the same decision as everyone else. Do you stay here or do you get up and try to move? There was no right answer. It's just what they did. And I have to also say that Gunny Douglas's daughter, Pam, is here. I don't know where she is. Pam, where are you? There she is. Would you stand? Pam and Ronnie, thank you for coming and joining us today. Let's jump to it. That was an entire day for these folks, for these fellows. That fire, they had never seen anything like it. But they did, in midday, begin to pivot around to the right. I'm saying they. I'm going to talk about the 2nd Battalion, 23rd Marines still, E Company and F Company, and try to get around these pillboxes that were holding them up. And they made a late afternoon surge to the airfield and began to dig in. In fact, Gunny Douglas said, I got up to the airfield and I actually put my head over the side and looked out in front of me, and I realized, hey, wait a second, there's nothing in between me and the Empire of Japan. I'm getting back down off here. And so they dug in that night. Now, I'm going to tell you that when they dug in that night, I had many Marines telling me they started taking their personal photographs out of their wallets and burying them in the sand. They didn't want a Japanese soldier taking them when they overran them that night. The mentality of these Marines, their A team, was the tank infantry team. They had worked on it for a year and a half. They had done it in combat. They had worked on it more in training. And the Japanese had immediately undone the A team. The 2nd Battalion had 81 millimeters. They were knocked out that afternoon. Buck Finney was the leader of those. They were ineffective. They were trying to put some fire on the base of the airfield. So he was hoping to make use of their brand new rocket jeep that they had brought to Iwo Jima. It never fired a shot before the Japanese knocked it out. The 60 millimeters that they had brought with them all were lost when the Higgins boat carrying them was hit by Japanese fire. Half their ammunition was dragged back into the ocean by the surf. The 37 millimeters of the Regimental Weapons Company, the 2nd Anti-Tank Platoon attached to the 2nd Battalion, all knocked out. The 3rd Anti-Tank Platoon, coming ashore later with the 3rd Battalion, suffered a similar fate. One of their gun captains, a gunny sergeant, Charlie Kohler, on the first night on Tinian, you might have, if you remember your history, there were 6 Japanese tanks that rolled into the Marine positions that first night on Tinian. That rolled into Fox Company's position. Charlie Kohler and his gunners were lined up right behind them. This is 2 in the morning. And they took a terrible toll on those Japanese tanks. Here, Charlie lost his gun, his crew killed, and he was wounded, and was evacuated to a ship and was 40 feet away from his brother, who was also wounded, but nobody would tell him that because they knew his brother wasn't going to make it. Now I'm going to lighten the mood a little bit there. Charlie told me when he got back to Guam, the female nurses were going to take his trousers off, and he said, hey, wait a second here. Now, I don't remember exactly how he put it, but I'll say it this way. He said, the nurse said, now, wait a minute, buddy. Me and my crew have seen enough of those things to spike the railroad from the West Coast to the East Coast. And she said, okay, he said, all right, let's get busy. And we're honored also to have his son, Keith Kohler, here with us today. Keith, would you stand up? The day's gains, we'll compare it to what they planned or what they hoped for. Well, the 5th Marine Division managed to get across the narrow neck of the island and isolate Mount Suribachi. But the gains there were limited essentially to the airfield at the end of that day. But I will say this, they brought in the 2nd Battalion, 24th Marines, attached it to the 23rd, and the 3rd Battalion, 23rd, were in position, ready to launch the attack across the airfield the next morning. This is a picture of the 2nd Battalion, 24th, getting ready to launch that attack. And to this day, this battalion is still part of the command of the 23rd Marines, which I find interesting. They spent many days on Iwo Jima fighting together. Another of the stories, when the battalion was attempting to maneuver around those pillboxes, at some point in that maneuver, Major Lester Faught was wounded, but nobody knew it until the next morning. Through the night, some of the Marines remembered hearing a call for help, but they knew better than to try to respond to such a thing. The Japanese used that many times to try to get the Marines to respond. The next morning, at first light, they went up there and they found Major Faught there, and he had his .45, his pistol laid out, disassembled. Apparently it had gotten dirty, and he'd disassembled this thing trying to clean it, but couldn't get it back together. but he was badly wounded, and many of the Marines thought he was dead as they moved him back to the beach. But he was taken aboard ship, the USS Ozark, and although he rallied the next day, on the 21st of February, was overtaken by high fever and passed away on the ship. But Major Faught had come down from battalion and taken over Easy Company on Saipan after that company had lost all of its officers after multiple mortar barrages and led them superbly throughout that operation. And his Marines, many of them went to tears when they found out that he had passed away. And we have with us today his nephew, Jeff Faught. Jeff, would you stand and say hello, please? Just a quick glimpse backward toward the beach to give us a sense of elevation and of the reverse look at some of those positions that were confronting the Marines as they tried to climb this elevation to the airfield. Now, I put this in here because I knew better than to not put it in here. But after Kyle's presentation, I don't need to say a word about that. So I'm going to jump 2 weeks or so. The Marines had to take the central part of the island, but as Rich Frank mentioned earlier, the bulk of these defenses were in northern Iwo Jima, and that's where I want to take us. And I think you'll enjoy this. I hope so. I will enjoy this. First time we've done this. On the 6th of March, let me drop back. On the 5th of March, the order was given across the island for everyone to hold, rest, and reorganize. They'd taken a beating. And Lieutenant General Holland Smith said that they believed that when they launched this big push into the northern part of Iwo Jima, if they would hit it with everything they had in terms of artillery and naval gunfire, maybe they could help break some of those defenses. That was 12 battalions of artillery, all the divisions, the 105s, and also the 155s from the corps level. They fired first in front of the 5th Marine Division zone, and then in front of the 3rd and 4th Marine Divisions zones that morning. In fact, Gunny Douglas talked about this. He said that was the most terrifying thing he had to live through practically, other than being fired up by the Japanese. Those 155s hitting right in front of them, he said, just shook them off the ground. Well, that's the morning of the 6th of March when this attack begins, with the 5th Marine Division pushing up the northern or the western part of Iwo Jima. The 3rd Marine Division, now 2/3 of it, 2 of their regiments, pushing across that upper airfield. And the 4th Marine Division still trying to swing the entire attack around like a door on a hinge. And our 2nd Battalion, 23rd Marine guys were attacking toward the high ground that would lead to this corridor leading down to Tacha Iwo Point. In fact, on the 6th of March, what everyone was trying to do was to get to the high ground. It was not terribly high, but it was dominating ground on Iwo Jima. And from there, from the center of the island, the terrain broke down into these broken troughs and corridors outward toward the ocean in all directions. The attacking Marines had to attack into these things. These are perpendicular to their line of attack. So they're attacking against the grain in this terrain. Getting to the high ground would allow them then to attack outward with the grain, much easier tactically and everything else. So, as the 2nd Battalion launched their attack, I want to give you a picture, 2 pictures. This is a panorama from 2 photos by Joe Glozak. There's 2 options of terrain, out in the open, which does not mean passable terrain by tanks or anything else, and then in those rocky jungles. Those rocks you see are the size of small houses. It is there where the Japanese hid their weapons. Out in the open terrain was mined and blockaded with rocks. Why? Purposefully to keep the tank infantry team from getting together. Anywhere the tanks tried to go, they were under fire from those 47 millimeters or into minefields. Therefore, the combat engineers spent a great deal of time trying to work with those tanks to clear a path so that the team could get together to fight as one. But whereas on Saipan and Tinian, where the presence of tanks was welcome by the Marines, the infantry, on Iwo Jima, they were a magnet for enemy fire. And the Japanese did a superb job of making them, what's the term, radioactive. you might say, to keep the Marines away from them. Who can attack into that terrain? Well, only the infantry can. You can't get tanks into there. Your heavy artillery can't really do much in there. And remember, the Japanese are largely underground. Who can get in there? Really, the rifle company is the tip of the spear. There are 72 rifle companies, Marine rifle companies, on Iwo Jima fighting. It's roughly 235 Marines of 3 rifle platoons, a machine gun platoon, a mortar section, etc. That rifle company can't get into that terrain. Who can get in there? Well, let's start from the basics. Remember that 4-man fire team, there's 3 Marines and a leader, built around a Browning automatic rifle and led by a corporal. Now, those corporals in the PFCs in the 4th Marine Division were veterans of the Marianas. And after the Marianas, they trained intensively on Maui in the assault on fortified positions. The problem was on Maui with the 4th Division, they were only at about 60% strength. 2nd Battalion was at 50% strength, missing most of the privates who would fill out these fire teams. But they had to train anyway. That's the fire team. You put 3 of those together and add a leader, now you've got a rifle squad. But the reason this was done in early 1944, now there's not a single decision maker, but 4 decision makers. The sergeant and 3 corporals. This is to provide us flexibility by pushing decision making down to the lowest possible level to deal with whatever pops up on these Pacific battlefields. Put 3 of those squads together and now you've got the basics of a rifle platoon. This is the basic maneuver unit of the rifle company. You can't fit a platoon in this terrain in northern Iwo Jima. Platoon Sergeant Sam Haddad said, you know, I never moved a squad on Iwo Jima. On Saipan and Tinian, you could move a squad. You had flat open spaces. There was space for them to get there. On Iwo Jima, there was no such space in northern Iwo Jima. In fact, when you jumped off in the morning, the 2s and 3s, the small groups would begin to form. And in this terrain, it was even tough to fit a squad together for them to fight as one. In fact, much of the fighting in northern Iwo Jima was characterized by the 4-man fire team, or buddies, in this kind of terrain. Now, I would also tell you that no photographers really went into that rocky jungle, so we're going to look at it in a different way. Now, okay, this is a good cue for me. The regimental commander for the 23rd Marines, Colonel Walt Winsinger, characterized what the Japanese were doing and what their plan was as mousetrapping. Into that terrain, you had to get in there to get to the enemy weapons, and a small group had to sneak through this rocky jungle. The Japanese would pin them down with machine guns and then pound them with mortar fire. And this happened over and over again. I'm going to show you an example of that from Fox Company. That's what it looked like. This is essentially the experience of being mousetrapped. We're going to look into that rocky terrain, not by photograph, but by these penciled notes taken by the acting platoon sergeant of 2nd Platoon. He was a sergeant. Both platoon sergeants, the platoon sergeant itself and the platoon guide, were lost on D-Day. So he is now acting platoon sergeant, Sergeant Bud Gavigan. And he wrote notes every day they're in the attack on northern Iwo Jima. We're going to interpret this one. You don't have to worry about reading everything, but you'll see very clearly he's got 1st squad, 2nd squad, 3rd squad, and down at the bottom, the command group, what weapons they have, etc. He wrote this on the 5th of March before they went into the attack. He revisited this at the end of the day on the 6th of March. Let's look at it graphically, visually. It was led by 2nd Lieutenant Kyle Drake, straight out of Texas A&M. He was only with the company a month before they sailed to Iwo Jima, as was a great portion of the rest of the division, as I mentioned. They only got those replacements that they were missing on Thanksgiving. Very little time to really forge a team and to be able to assault fortified positions using mission command and other things we talk about, implicit understanding of each other and trust and confidence. Now, nominally, that's what his platoon would look like. We'll see what Gavigan's notes tell us. Let's see what the makeup is here. One thing his notes don't tell us before we see this. During the battle on Iwo Jima, they took more replacements who were assigned to them alphabetically, individually. Some of these names: Carson, Cottrell, Carrillo, Codron, Burnside, and Blum. You see the B's and C's being thrown into these rifle companies. They know no one. They've done no training, had no training with these guys. This is a reality in this terrain when you've got these small teams especially. At the end of the day, on the 6th of March, first squad, we can see what happens to them. Let's see, second squad. What about the third squad? Which squad was in the lead, snaking through those rocks in northern Iwo Jima? Absolutely. And Lieutenant Kyle Drake, when he was up there with them, they were pinned down by snipers and machine guns and being pummeled by mortars, and he was anxious to generate action and rose up one time too many, and a sniper's round got him in the jugular, and the men had to watch him die in front of them. And so they lost Lieutenant Drake there as well. That's what we see in Sergeant Gavigan's notes. And that allows us now to see into this terrain where no photographer went. Now, I'll tell you real quickly that when that happened, the radio operator, Dennis Cavanaugh, got on the radio and called the company CP and said, "Drake's dead, Drake's dead." And they said, "We'll get somebody over to you." Remember, they don't have platoon sergeants. They've lost them already also. So over goes Platoon Sergeant Sam Haddad from 3rd Platoon with the company runner. Doesn't know why he's being sent there. Takes a quick look at the situation and assesses this is not good. And they make another call back to the company CP and say, "You better get somebody up here. There's no officers up here." The response to him is, "You're it. You've got to get those men out." In short, he does. With the cover of smoke, they get not only the live men, but also the casualties and the wounded, and get them back that evening. Let's cut to the chase. This is the first day of attack into northern Iwo Jima. Fox Company's losses: 8 killed, 33 wounded, and 2 sick evacuated or combat fatigued. Now we have 2 platoons in the attack here of roughly 45 Marines. Let's read into these numbers a little more clearly. Who were those that were lost? You've got 1 platoon leader killed, 2 platoon sergeants gone, 3 sergeants, and 16 corporals, those guys leading your fire teams. You only have 18 fire teams in the attack this day, and you've lost 16 of your corporals on the first day of this attack in northern Iwo Jima. That's the reality of this terrain here. Fox Company's commander at the time was Captain, later Lieutenant General, Lawrence F. Snowden.
Those young Marines, despite the casualties we suffered today, they knew that tomorrow we're going to do the same thing all over again. When the sun went down, we tried to count what our casualties were and who was left, and what do we need to carry on tomorrow. They knew what was going to happen tomorrow. They're going to continue to butt their heads against that stone wall of resolve on the Japanese side. But they did it anyway. They didn't hesitate. They knew that's what they were there for. They knew what the objectives were, and they fought in terms of let's gain the objective and get out of here. And another side effect of that was that we tried to instill in the troops, the attitude was, if your leader goes down, step in and take the responsibility for leadership. Don't wait for somebody else to come. Do what's got to be done. Step in and fill the shoes of that lost leader you had. And Marines did that. We ended up with corporals commanding platoons. We ended up with sergeants sometimes commanding companies. That's because the servant leadership concept mixed with the desire to gain the objective and required teamwork and somebody to lead it. It all fitted together. 1, to make effective battlefield tactics. 2nd, to ensure that we kept our eye on the objective. And 3rd, working together. Regardless who the leader is, we work together under that leadership to do what's got to be done. That's what paid off on Iwo Jima.
In northern Iwo Jima, the Japanese used that terrain to isolate and pin down and mousetrap the Marines. What about on the beach on D-Day? They had used the sand to do the same thing, like one of those sticky traps, right? To render the Marines, to welcome them ashore and render them immobile pin them down with machine guns, and then pound them with plunging fire. This is General Kobayashi's strategy, done very effectively in 2 different ways. Same thing achieved. Now, while all that is going on, there's a Navy C-47 or a R-4D that has landed. It was supposed to land about 7:30 in the morning, but it's been circling all that time because of that morning barrage we talked about, and they can finally land here on that #1 airfield. Piloting this is Lieutenant John Burns, and aboard his plane, which he's named the Back Bay Special, he's got a photographer named Lieutenant Gil DeWitt, a chief pharmacist mate, and a 22-year-old flight nurse named Ensign Jane Kendi. And she's just become the first Navy flight nurse to land in an active combat zone. I'm showing here the position where they're headed. It's the air evacuation center that they've established, actually 3 days earlier, right next to the 3rd Marine Division Hospital, the 3rd Medical Battalion. I'm showing you where the 4th Marine Division Hospital is as well, relative to the attack we just talked about. You'll see why in just a moment. Her squadron is Air Evacuation Squadron number 2, formed on the 12th of December in Kaneohe under Clarence Keller. And they've got 12 R-4Ds that they flew out to Guam in January. But also on Guam was the first 12 of these flight nurses, including their chief nurse, Lieutenant Emily Purvis, who dubbed these nurses the Dirty Dozen, because it was anything but glamorous. Now, they were issued a flight suit that we'll see. They were issued a flight jacket and sunglasses. On Guam, they had to go to an Army PX to purchase their boots to wear. They had to fend for themselves. And on the 3rd of March, the leading echelon of the squadron, the planes landed on Iwo Jima, and they did bring a few casualties off, though the fire was a little heavy. But they were operating for 3 days, not using the flight nurses. And Lieutenant Purvis tells us she had to get in a Jeep, go find the skipper, and plead the case that these highly trained flight nurses needed to be utilized. Now, a lot of the crews, the male crews, weren't too pleased by this because of the old superstitions like you would have on ships. You bring a woman on board, you're going to jinx the whole mission. But Commander Keller agreed to give them a shot. And so on the evening of the 5th of March, they got word that, and I'm preempting myself here, they got word that they were headed for Iwo Jima the next morning. And I want to list here the names of the Dirty Dozen. In fact, we'll see a couple of them. If you visit the museum, you'll see the, I've got her name written differently here, but Norma Crotty, her flight log is here in the museum, and Gwen Jensen's flight suit is also here. And of course, up front we have exhibited Jane Kendi's Navy flight jacket and various other elements from Lieutenant Purvis and Jane Kendi's flight log of the 6th of March mission. So I hope you'll take time to see those. So on the 5th of March, they got word that they're going to head to Iwo Jima the next morning. Also on the 5th of March, that Navy photographer, Lieutenant Gil DeWitt, he's part of Edward Steichen's photographic team, legendary team out across the Pacific. And he's told by his boss, you're going to be aboard that first plane, and you're going to document the flight nurse becoming the first to land in an active combat zone. He got to Agana Airfield, it tells us, a little early, about 10 minutes early, and the plane he was supposed to be on already left. It left even earlier than that. That was Emily Purvis's plane. Lieutenant Purvis tells us when she got on that plane that morning, she and the pharmacist mate that she was with knew the attitude of some of the crews. She said, we got on that plane, buckled in, and kept our heads down and sat there like dopes. Didn't want to stir up any trouble. So Gil went back to plane number 2 and found a young flight nurse on there named Jane Kendi and Doc Silas Sturtevant, who had been in since 1939, and they were sitting chatting, and he explained his situation, what he was there to do, and he snapped this photograph before they even buckled in for taking off. But this is very early in the morning, and we find from Jane's flight log, if you'll notice when you look at it, that when they did take off, they made a stop at Saipan on the way. We never knew that before. Lieutenant Purvis tells us that was a fueling stop on the way. I'm not sure they did that the whole time. When they did get in the air, he snapped a photo of Jane getting some rest, finally. A couple of things I want to point out to you here. What's she lying on? a tall stack of wool blankets. Why? Because Iwo Jima was a chilly island. It was the first operation where the Marines were not operating in a tropical zone. So the casualties were being sent off the island with an average of 3 blankets. They're going to run out of blankets pretty quickly. They're taking replacements, 3 for each casualty that they'll remove from the island, as well as replacement stretchers you see in the background on the auxiliary fuel tank. When they landed on Iwo Jima, finally, Jane Kennedy and Gil DeWitt went into the tent and they said, "Where's Lieutenant Purvis?" And they were informed, well, her plane missed the island. So by chance, Gil was with the first Navy flight nurse to land on Iwo Jima. And here comes Lieutenant Purvis right behind her. And that plane is called Peg of My Heart. And her navigator had missed the island, and you know who got the blame. In fact, it looks like the pilot's coming in pretty hot, as a matter of fact. She says it happened her second trip to Iwo Jima as well. They missed the island. Goodness gracious. Nonetheless, there's Lieutenant Purvis and Jane right behind her inside the medical evacuation tent while a Marine's being given a whole blood transfusion. And I'll tell you this, while the attack was going up north, one of the squad leaders in Fox Company, it was Sergeant Bill Wyckoff, who you see kneeling second from right up front there. And as soon as the attack jumped off, he said, "Follow me," and there was an explosion, and down he went. And Corporal Leroy Surface dragged him off the battlefield and had to take over now the squad, of course. And Doc Owen H. Bankin treated him very quickly, pulled 2 skivvy shirts out of a pack, stuffed it in the hole in his chest. They got him back to the battalion aid station where they pulled some of the shrapnel out of his eyes, made sure he was stable enough, got him all the way back to the division hospital in time for him, and this is him being carried through the CP on that stretcher. In fact, with a cigarette there, standing looking down, that's our Sergeant Bud Gavigan, whose notes we were just reading. And he looked over there and saw someone being carried in immediately. He said, "Who is that?" And they mouthed to him, "That's Wyckoff." So he sent this picture to Bill. Got all of that done, back to Division Hospital, over to the flight evacuation station to be one of the first casualties to be evacuated by plane that same day. I'm telling you, if we could tell stories of what the Cormen, I'm going to tell you one. What the Cormen did to get these Marines off the battlefield back to treatment at the battalion aid station. Danny Burt Thomas, who was from Blossom Prairie, Texas, was with 2nd Battalion, 23rd. I'll tell you 2 things. One night he was in a hole with a Marine, and a sniper's round went through that Marine's jugular. He said, "There was one spurt, and I was astride him, and I was able to get both ends of that jugular and clamp both of them off, tape him up, and he walked back to the battalion aid station." Another Marine had a sucking chest wound. Danny had nothing with which to stuff that. He cleaned the Marine's thumb off, poured a bottle of brandy over it, stuck it in the hole, taped him up, and sent him walking back to the aid station. This is the life of a corpsman. This is the life of the Marines who end up in Navy hospitals on Guam. It's how they get there. These guys are nuts. This is impressive. Within the first 30 minutes, Bill is at the flight evacuation station after being wounded. Now that's Bill at the bottom right. And Gil DeWitt, of course, was on the scene to snap this very famous photograph of this young and lovely Navy flight nurse comforting this Marine. It was printed all over the country in newspapers, and the National Geographic, etc., and she really became something of a celebrity. A couple of comments about this operation. They staggered flights and intended for them to be on the ground no longer than 30 minutes, and flights coming behind them. This took about an hour on this first day. They got 16 casualties off the island on this plane. They also planned initially to evacuate 350 Marines a week. They averaged more than half of that, or about half of that, every day. So each evening, Guam would get a phone call from Iwo, essentially, with a request for how many planes they needed the next morning. and those flights would vary each day. So Jane, there were several other planes on the island. In fact, I estimate there were 9 of the planes and 9 flight nurses that landed on the 6th of March, based on the numbers evacuated. One was Gwen Jensen, whose flight jacket is exhibited here, and also Stella McCarr, being interviewed here by Marine Combat Correspondent Al Josephi, who was there with the 3rd Marine Division. On the flight back to Guam, and this is some of the photos that DeWitt took. In fact, on the right, she's talking to Bill Wyckoff there. But she's watching for hemorrhaging, that's going to start back, and shock, especially, and then treating pain and those types of things. But that's especially what she's looking for. And she was also capable of feeding them, which they did, those who were capable of eating. Most were. On Guam, this is a photograph of them being unloaded on the 6th, and they are screened and expedited to Navy hospitals. The Fleet Hospital 111, for example, was used, and that's where Bill ended up. The point I want to make out here is they know that 8 other planes are on their way. They've got to get these folks unloaded into hospitals and back with their ambulances over and over through these 9 cycles on this one day. Just a few numbers to give you some of their evacuation stats in March. The peak of 11 March, 248 Marines evacuated that one day. That took, I'm sure, all 12 planes and all 12 flight nurses to get that done. But we see on the 6th of March, 171 evacuated that day. The comparison for hospital ships and other troop ships, it might surprise you to know that most casualties were treated on troop transports and other vessels. There were 2 hospital ships that were operating in tandem, the USS Samaritan and Solace, each of which made 3 trips from Iwo Jima to the Marianas, the first to Saipan, the following 2 to Guam, even passing each other. I envision passing each other in the night, did stellar service. But starting midway through the campaign, the flight evacuation edition greatly bolstered those numbers. There were some days when you could not get evacuees or casualties off the island because the surf was so bad. That wasn't really a problem with the flights. As I said, Jane was something of a celebrity. She was sent back for a war bond tour, as I recall. I think I'm correct there. Here she is in Honolulu in a press conference, and she became pretty well known. But she went home without ever meeting any of her Marines until 41 years later at Camp Pendleton, when she and Bill Wyckoff were reunited at the Iwo Jima reunion. That was Saturday, the 22nd of February, 1986. And here, on Saturday, the 22nd of February, 2025, their family members are going to meet. Julie Wright, Jane's granddaughter, and Bill Wyckoff Jr. Bill, would you come up? When I get to the point where I can speak again, it's important for them to know, important for Julie to know who her grandmother is to the Marines. God, I'm going to have to take over in a minute if I lose it here. It's a special moment. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Julie. And we'll all be getting together later, so there'll be time to visit. Oh, fantastic. What about what happened in northern Iwo Jima when that attack continued? With the loss of those corporals, what are we going to do to carry on tomorrow? Platoon Sergeant Sam Haddad got a field commission, became second lieutenant, took over second platoon. We had many discussions about this. I said, Sam, in that terrain, how could you control a unit? My words. You couldn't control a unit. There was no such possibility on Iwo Jima, said Sam. He said, on Saipan and Tinian, You could control a unit. You could see, and maybe even a platoon could react. On site, on Iwo Jima, it was not a matter of control. It was a matter of everybody knew where they had to go. Those are his words. But Sam, how did you get the Marines to move forward if you couldn't see them? You didn't have to get them to move forward. They moved forward on their own. Wait a minute, this is not what I want to hear. I don't understand. This is a long time coming. Sam had those replacements. He's lost a lot of his valued, experienced veteran NCOs. What's he do about this? He said, in the evening, when we dug in, I would crawl to the foxholes, each foxhole on my hands and knees, and look these fellows in the eye, especially the replacements, to see how they're doing. Maybe if they're not feeling well, and maybe they need to go back. That was his way of saying, are they experiencing combat fatigue? And some of them would say, you know, Sergeant, I don't know if I can do this. And he said, listen, don't let that get you. I'm afraid as well, like everybody, but there are things we have to do. And every night, he would check with them, see how they're doing, and then discuss what we're doing tomorrow morning, what we have to achieve. And he would remind them, tonight, we are all here. We are not going anywhere. Stay in your hole. Do not get out of your hole. Anyone above ground is the enemy. If you get out, you'll get shot. And he did this repeatedly. 2 nights later, after the company advanced some 800 yards down the corridor toward Tateiwa Point, they pressed the Japanese. The Japanese came out of their positions and launched a counterattack. Sam's small platoon of 22 Marines was strung across that corridor. The Japanese attacked in 3 waves. They did not break through. Those replacements did not get up and run. Sam said, you know, these replacements, you would think they might have gotten up and run, but they didn't. They stayed. And they did a good job. I said, Sam, I think I know why. They stayed. These are the men who were holding it together in northern Iwo Jima. It was not superior firepower or technology. It was these veteran NCOs, these leaders, generating action with personal leadership and strategic leadership following that as well. Roy Stewart was one of those replacements on Iwo Jima. His daughter Nancy's here. Nancy, would you please stand? I'm going to tell a story while we're doing that. My favorite story from Roy, because this is classic Roy Stewart. He said, when I was in boot camp, they told us that any Marine could whip any 3 sailors. He said, now, when I went out on my first liberty, I found out that was a lie. That's Roy Stewart. They finally got word that they're going to leave Iwo Jima, and I asked Roy and many others. That had to feel pretty good. Roy had something else to tell me. He said, as soon as we heard that we were going to leave this island, a tremendous weight of gloom settled down on us. A lot of the Marines strolled through the division cemetery to find their buddies. A lot would not, because they did not want the affirmation that they were dead. And once they were finally back on the ship, Roy he was on the USS Rockbridge, as the battalion was. 2 days later, there was a Protestant service held on the Fantail, and Roy said, from where I was sitting, I was looking ashore at the division cemetery, and I wanted to jump off and swim back. Admiral Nimitz was correct when he said uncommon valor was a common virtue. But it was uncommon resolve that won that battle. Fox Company's commander, Captain Larry Snowden, retired after 37 and a half years as Assistant Commandant of the Marine Corps and Lieutenant General. But his crowning achievement in his mind was the annual Joint Reunion of Honor that took place and still takes place on Iwo Jima, bringing both sides together, survivors and family members, once enemies and now friends. In 2015, he was headed back at the age of 94, headed back for his 20th returned to Iwo Jima. And I said, Larry, okay, we know the toll this trip takes on you. We've got to get together and sit down and film a discussion, which we did. And I asked him, why is it important for us to commemorate a battle like Iwo Jima? A lot of folks have a difficult time understanding that.
Well, I'd like to answer that in terms of what I think the flag raising memorial, the Marine Corps War Memorial in Arlington. I want young people to look at that and recognize that those who are shown in that statue of the memorial, that they are representative of the young people who fought on that island. And those who fought on that battle on Iwo Jima represent the millions of young men and young women who went to war in World War II. One of the problems is that young people, and lots of others, have a hard time understanding that 16 million men and women served their nation in World War II. And on the day the war ended, 12 million of those were still in uniform, and 70% of them had served overseas. I want the War Memorial flag raising statue to be a reminder to young people that what they enjoy today in freedom has to be paid for. It was paid for by those guys representing the others who represented the others. And that's the message I want them to carry away. And I also want young Marines to understand that those men that they see up there set the standards that they are expected to meet today. I'm assured by the Commandant of the Marine Corps and those that I see that those standards are still being met by our young Marines today. And I think it's important for young Marines to know that it was their code as Marines to prevail in that battle. I'm often asked the question, what was your most effective weapon on Iwo Jima? Flamethrowers, flamethrower tanks, satchel charges, rifles, machine guns, rockets, what? My answer is none of the above. My most effective weapon on Iwo Jima was an individual young 18-year-old Marine. His personal training, his dedication to his fellow Marines, his patriotism, his personal valor and bravery, all combined in that one individual to make him my most effective weapon on that island. The Marines of today are still trying to meet that challenge, and they're doing it. But so I want that war memorial and the flag raising there to be a constant reminder to all America that those folks help pay for what you're doing today. And if you think your life is tough today, think about them. If you're grateful for your status today and what you do, and all of us can do today what we want to do, we'll do it again tomorrow if we want to. Why? Because those young men and their compatriots did what they did when they served.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today.